Greetings, hello, good day, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining True Hope Cast, the official podcast of True Hope Canada. True Hope Cast takes a deep dive into mental health's many physiological and psychological aspects. This is the show for you if you're looking for motivation, inspiration, knowledge, and solutions. That's what we are all about here at True Hope Canada. And True Hope Canada is a mind and body-based supplement company dedicated first and foremost to promoting brain and body health through non-invasive nutritional means. For more information about us, you can visit truehopecanada.com. Today, I welcome Natasha and Nazerali to the podcast. Now, Natasha is the CEO and creative director of the conscious brand Wondheirland, which is a platform that strives to create educational courses, events, and one-to-one sessions that encourage individuals to awaken to living their truth. Her mother's passion for the mind, body, and soul allowed her to learn the 5 biological laws, which was discovered by Dr.Humer, which is the sacred biology of the human that fully integrates the synchronicity of the psyche, brain, and organ connection. This truly enabled Natasha to understand and educate others on how to achieve total sovereignty and freedom over their health and healing. It is our greatest honor to serve others by bringing them back to the remembrance of their true divine nature. Today on the podcast, we are going to be discussing German New Medicine. Enjoy the show. Natasha, hi. Welcome to True Hope Cast. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me, Simon.
What's going well today? It's been some funky weather outside.
What's going well? It's a beautiful day. Spent my morning by the ocean. Got some vitamin D. It's gorgeous in the sun. Lots of snow. So I'm having a great day.
Wonderful. Well, please give us a little bit of an introduction about who you are and what it is that you do, please.
Absolutely. So my name is Natasha Nazerali. I'd like to say I've been on the spiritual journey from the beginning, and I've always strived to work within the field of consciousness. And I grew up as a professional dancer, dancing in Los Angeles and New York, and that was really the start of merging art with spirituality. And later, during the pandemic, I decided to create my own conscious brand with ethical jewelry. And at the same time, I had been growing up with my mother, who really guided me on spirituality and consciousness. And she was an educator and practitioner in the 5 biological laws and German New Medicine. And I just saw an opportunity where people were really looking for guidance and answers with everything that was going on in the pandemic. And I had more free time, not working. So we decided to work together, and through our own, passion with consciousness and awakening and spreading the truth, we decided to form a study group and to just get the word out about the 5 biological laws as much as we could. And now we have regular courses and regular study groups and events where we work with colleagues and doctors and practitioners all over the world. And we really just strive to educate as many people as possible on gaining sovereignty over their health and achieving a really full understanding of what it means to live in accordance with your mind, body, and spirit.
Wow, that's a lot. Mm-hmm. That's cool.
Absolutely.
What does gaining sovereignty over your own health mean?
Well, through the perspective of the GHK lens, it means understanding that the psyche, the brain, and the organ work together in absolute synchronicity. And when you really live in alignment with that, you start to understand that nothing that is happening in your body or in your biology is working against you. Nothing is malignant. To be malignant means to have evil in your body, and your body is always working for you. So achieving true sovereignty is understanding that alignment and working with your body in accordance with the 5 biological laws, really.
Wow. Okay. Can you give us a little bit of an intro? Like what's German New Medicine? Maybe give us like the foundational piece there.
Absolutely. So let's start with the history of how we even got here today. So German New Medicine was developed by Dr.Humer, and he went through an experience of his own testicular cancer. He was working in oncology at the time, and he really thought, there's no coincidence that I'm having this testicular cancer. It has to be for a reason. Mm-hmm. With his journey, his son was killed very tragically, and he developed his testicular cancer soon after. And he, through his own conscious awareness, thought, there's no way this is an accident. I've just gone through this immense trauma. There has to be a sort of synchronistic
connection between the two.
Absolutely. And he thought, how could I prove this? How could I validate this sort of gnosis through science?
Was he a doctor at the time?
Absolutely.
Okay.
He was a doctor at the time. He was working in oncology. He was also working as a professor. And so he had the ability to have all these case studies too.
Yeah.
He was really set up in the perfect opportunity to dive deep. So what he decided was he would first off talk to all his patients who were also going through testicular cancer. And he asked them if there had been something significant in their life that they had gone through. And they had all gone through a significant loss, just like him with his son. A loss conflict, yes. And so he thought, okay, I'm going to go through another layer now. I'm going to see whether we could actually validate that through the brain, because the brain is the control center of all our organ anatomy. Mm-hmm. So from there, he went and studied the brain scans of his patients, and he found that in the relay of the brain that corresponded to the testicles, now I'm going to start to get a little specific here, in that relay of the brain, they all had a slight, what we call a hammer focus, okay? So he could actually pinpoint that there was something there. And he took this and he studied thousands of patients with thousands of different cancers and thousands of different diseases. And he was able to validate the discovery that everything that we experience in the body is actually a result of a conflict shock. And it actually happens at the brain level first. And then the organ is responding to what we're experiencing. So through his work, through his own experience, he pretty much set out on a determined conquest to validate this notion. And he was successful in doing so. And now for many, many years, practitioners and doctors around the world carry on this legacy. And really the goal is that we all get to the point where we study this work so we can all live a lifestyle in accordance with this knowing. And then you really have no more fear over anything else again that could happen to you.
When did all this happen? What's the timeline here?
This was in the 70s.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this initial discovery that Dr. Hofer, is it Hofer?
Dr.Humer, Dr. Humer.
Okay, in the 70s, so 50 years later.
Absolutely, but I always like to point out, this was not an invention of Dr. Humer. This is the way our biology works, and his amazing work proved that and started a foundation for what we can now carry on and a lens we can look on to understand our biology today. So I always like to say that it's not an invention of his. It was just a way of proving that we can actually pinpoint that what we experience in our life and the traumas and the conflicts that we go through, they are in charge of what symptoms we will have in our body.
Yeah, I think everyone's got an example, whether it's personally or a friend that they know who's gone through something significant in their life, whether that's in their childhood or their adulthood, and then pinpoint that to getting sick or having a significant illness like cancer or something. I think everyone's got an example of that. I know that I certainly do. I've got a couple of them. So it's just fascinating that this guy has just stumbled across, had the actual consciousness and awareness to connect the two.
Yes.
And so fortunate that he was in a place where he's able to facilitate the research, facilitate the testing, and test this hypothesis that obviously, it's not it's a discovery of a process that's always been there. It's always been available to us. So that I think it makes sense to a lot of people who are more in the natural realm, that the body is designed and there to heal us, make us feel incredible, and do all of these incredible things that it does.
Absolutely.
Not to put us in a state of disease.
And it's just a gnosis. Any sort of person who has some sort of conscious awareness about their own self can say, yeah, absolutely, what we experience impacts our own biology. And in our work, we really like to say biological programs or a biological adaptation, as opposed to using terminology like it's a disease, right? Because actually our words have a lot of power. And when you go through this, you're actually grateful for what you experience, because every one of these symptoms, there are messengers. They're showing us something. They're mirroring us something that we're experiencing in our life. So you might hear me over the next course of the conversation talk a lot about biological programs as opposed to a disease or an ailment or an infection.
Yeah.
These are biological adaptations that are helping us overcome what we're experiencing in our life.
Yeah, I mean, it's super interesting, the fact that, somebody who might have a pathological disease, a diagnosis, it's not like they wake up one day and it's like there. These things take time, they grow. And I think that a lot of people who've experienced with a trauma or a loss or something significant in their life, that energy and that very hyperbolic situation, that energy's got to go somewhere, right? Like within the body. And we're not really in a society where something big happens to us and we digest it and we lay it out on the table and we like go through it and we end up we kind of like eliminate the situation.
Absolutely. We want oftentimes quick fix solutions.
Yeah.
And the majority of the time, the biological programs we experience, they're always in accordance with the level of the conflict shock. So if you had a very extreme conflict shock, the biological program that you're going to have is going to be in accordance with that. So it's also going to be severe. If the conflict shock was severe, the healing program is severe. So it's not like I take a magic pill and it's all gone. It's about really working in accordance with that. But that's also why True Hope is so great, because when you have a really great support system and when you have, a conscious relationship that you're already having with your body based on what you're feeding it or based on what supplements you're taking, how you're supporting your body, that way, anything that you do experience, because, just because this work doesn't mean you're invincible, right? We're still going to have things that come up, but now we're better prepared to deal with them and go through them. So it's still important to maintain your health overall, physically too.
Yeah, and we have this very weird thing in our culture where we don't listen to the messages that the body gives us, right? So pain, fatigue, all of these things, like not being able to sleep, like all of these things are messages within the body, like trying to tell us what to do. But what do? We go and we get a drug to try and deal with these symptoms, which have side effects, which we'll take more drugs to deal with those side effects. So we end up just like trying to be super ignorant and ignore these very, very powerful messages that the body's always been able to do, to tell us like, listen, you've got pain in that area, you've got like this going on and this going on. And by choosing to ignore that through the profound effects that pharmaceuticals have, we massively miss out on what I would call like a really ancient sense that we have with our own bodies. Like we've obviously got our five senses, but I feel like we're this like species with amnesia when it comes to our ability to recognize that there are things happening in my life that are traumatic, and my body is going to give me very, very good, solid feedback for when those things are out of balance.
Exactly. Our ancestors knew this knowledge, and that's exactly why Dr.Humer called it Germanische Heilkunde, which means Germanic healing knowledge. It's not because of his own German patriotism. It's because of the Germanic people. They were philosophers, they were artists, they were living in harmony with nature and their biology. And when he named it Germanische Heilkunde, he was trying to put emphasis on the fact that this knowledge has been known, and that living within accordance with your biology is how we were actually meant to live, and it's how ancient civilizations were thriving throughout our history. And it's bringing back that sort of remembering of where we came from and how we once lived before. So I always laugh, and my mom laughs too, because it's like now it's been sort of slang German new medicine, and it really doesn't have anything to do with Germany, and it's really nothing new, and it has nothing to do with medicine, right? So there are some certain practitioners that might use their own terminology for it, but originally the work is Germanische Heilkunde, so there's still a GHK and there's a GNM, German New Medicine. But I always like to emphasize that the root of the name of Germanic healing knowledge came from that gnosis, came from him wanting to just really highlight that we knew this all along.
So from the 70s, how was this received by the conventional model?
Well, not well, as you can imagine. This was very threatening to the medical establishment and the system. And, this work was really, really undermined. They came at Dr. Humer hard, just like you would in any cancel culture nowadays. I mean, if you've looked at the past 2 years, we know this all too well. Anyone who speaks out against the system is going to get buried. So yes, he was imprisoned, he was exiled, and his history is vast. But the work speaks for itself. And I think that so many people already had this knowing within them that it has to all be related somehow. So, I mean, it was undeniable. This work was going to get out there. And I really stress to students who are eager to learn now, learn this work. It's your birthright to know this. This system as we know it is crumbling, and it's only going to crumble even more. The medical infrastructure, the medical establishment, I think we're seeing it's not helpful to our society that we have today. And this is going to be at the forefront. I mean, I just know that to be true.
I completely agree. Yeah. So many people have seen how the sausage is made, asking a lot more questions, and the trust that's been entrusted probably unnecessarily in a lot of these huge foundations and these massive institutions. Absolutely, like, questions are being asked and people are looking for an alternative, and that alternative is kind of like always been there for a lot of people. Where would people go if they wanted to like read more about like what we're talking about, especially like the history fascinates me specifically, but also like getting an idea of like this original like documentation in regards to the research that was done?
So my mom learned the 5 biological laws in German new medicine from an amazing educator, Dr. Carolina Merkela, who has an amazing website. It's called learninggnm.com. And I really believe it to be one of the most comprehensive websites, because you can search a disease or a symptom or an organ, and it will have the exact sort of answer, conflict root, everything you can imagine is on there, available to you for free to the public. So we really owe her a great gratitude for putting all that work together and having it be accessible. Also, there's the GHK Academy now. Dr. Helmut Pilar was the predecessor of Dr. Humer, who passed. And actually, Helmut Pilar has now passed as well. But the GHK Academy still continues. And there's amazing practitioners all over the world that teach and educate. And so there's an array of places you can go. But those are the two really big ones I would personally recommend, because they have a great foundation and a really comprehensive sort of platform for you to be able to get a gnosis and an understanding of what this work is.
Beautiful. I'll make sure that I'll put a couple of links in the show notes for people.
Absolutely.
How do you think that this has survived? Like, it sounds like in the last, to have the exposure of like these websites and these amazing practitioners like coming in, like, how do you think it survived like the inevitable onslaught from the conventional side?
So interestingly enough, I grew up with this work, so I didn't think anything of it. I mean, when my mom was first studying this was very underground, and for me, I just sort of have this different perspective, because I just always grew up going to my mom and saying, oh, I have a sore throat, what does that mean? Or in GNM, or like, oh, I think like something's going on in my musculature, what does that mean? And that just she always had an answer for everything I was going through. Cool. And it was almost like I had no secrets from my mom, because anytime I was sick, she was thinking, what did you just go through, right? So for me, it's really fun to be able to teach it now, because I sort of come from this background where it was just sort of normal with me in my household to be asking questions like this and to be having that relationship with your body. But nowadays, I feel you just can't stop the fire, because health and wellness is at the forefront. And there's also really amazing people within the GNM community that have made sure they're going to keep this work out there and keep this work accessible to the world, or as accessible as it possibly can be. So social media and technology just allowed it to grow even more. And now, you have people on TikTok even talking about this and talking about Dr.Humer and his own history. So I think when something is as powerful as this and as extensive, because Dr.Humer acquired a lot of extensive evidence through the brain scans and just your ability to understand this biology through the work is like, it's totally paradigm shifting. And I think, it's just, like the cream always rises to the top and the truth always comes out eventually. So I just think there was nothing stopping this fire. It was inevitable. And it was his destiny as a person to come to this planet and do this. If you want to think about it spiritually, sure, which I like to think about it spiritually, it's just his destiny.
Tell me about these 5 biological laws then.
Mm-hmm. So this is a big, extensive knowledge of work, and it might sound like, oh, what language is she speaking? But I'm going to just break it down in really simple terms for everyone to understand. But it does go a little bit deeper than this. So our first biological law is the iron rule of cancer. So that was the first discovery Dr. Humer had with his own experience with testicular cancer. And that number 1 rule is every biological program in the body comes from a conflict shock. So a conflict shock is a sudden event, unexpected, shocking that we experience. So maybe you just got that phone call, you lost your job, right? Conflict shock. Maybe you're driving in the car and someone just cut you off. Conflict shock. Because in this work, you think primal. What does the body do to survive? Anytime there's a threat, anytime there's conflict, your brain operates as a supercomputer. It's thinking and registering what smell is in the air, where am I located, what is the temperature outside, who am I with, right? So that's the number 1 rule. First, everything starts with the conflict, a shock. Our second rule gets a little bit more complicated, is the law of 2 phases. So that's our normal daytime, nighttime circadian rhythm. When we're going about our day, we're living in harmony. There's nothing on our minds that it's worrying us. We have a normal daytime to nighttime circadian rhythm. In our world, we like to call this your normatonia, your normal harmonious state. Now, when I experience a conflict, okay, maybe I just lost that job, right? We go into what's called conflict activity, okay? Our hands are cold, we can't sleep all night, we're up all night thinking about what the problem is, right? We've shifted that circadian rhythm to be on high alert. Now we're in the conflict activity. And now maybe you resolve the conflict, okay? I got a new job, or that car didn't cut me off in traffic and I didn't get in an accident and I'm okay. And we have this restoration, this healing phase that happens where the body readapts. Okay, we're no longer in conflict, and it goes through what we call a more vagatonic state. Okay, so now I'm like, okay, conflict over. So now I'm more tired and I need to rest and I need to process. And that's the healing phase. So our second law is this law of 2 phases, that each biological program, so every symptom in the body, goes in those 2 phases. And when you think about that one, like life works that way too, right? Like every birth experience, when you come to this world, we're conflict active and then we push it out, and then the mother finally has her child and she has this healing phase. So everything we really go through, your yoga works the same way. And that's our second law. Our third law is where we get a little bit more biological. That's our ontogenetic system. So that's looking at the different germ layers in the body and the different layers of the brain. So that's understanding where each organ falls within the ontogenetic system. The ontogenetic system is kind of how we form even from the embryo. And it helps us indicate whether we are, at how the cells are operating. I'm just going to break it down like real easy for everyone to get. So I'm not going to get too detailed into that one, but it does get very detailed when you go into this work. But that pretty much tells us which brain area we're working with, how the organ is functioning, and that ontogenetic system helps us get really, really, really detailed. Our fourth law is our law of microbes. So that is the understanding and the gnosis that microbes, fungi, bacteria are there to help us. So that one is a real paradigm shift for most people, okay? Yeah. But I like to encourage people, think of it like the firefighters. You know, we have something going on in the body, we have a fire, and now the body's going to send the signal for all those fungi, microbes, TB bacteria to come and help us out. So that's the understanding that we don't need to be afraid to, touch something that's not sanitized or kiss the dog if you want to, because it's about knowing that our microbiome is a healthy support system, and that when we have a biological program and we have an excess bacteria or fungi or microbacteria that's there, it's there to help us. Okay, so this is a whole paradigm shift about understanding so-called viruses. We don't really look at that through our lens. Okay, that's our fourth law. Then we move into our fifth law, which is the quintessence, that the psyche, brain, and the organ work together in synchronicity, and that every program has a function and has a purpose. So that's that extra layer of, okay, now I'm understanding that what I'm experiencing is through a conflict or a trauma. I get that. But not only is it just that, it's also that whatever adaptation I receive in the body is actually there to help me resolve that conflict. So if we look at Dr.Humer with his testicular cancer, his conflict was that he experienced a traumatic loss with the death of his son. And that resulted in his testicular cancer. Now, the extra layer is that what would nature do if you lost your child? The biological response would be to procreate, have another one. So what do the cells in the testicles do? They proliferate, okay, to assist me in being able to procreate again. So that fifth law is understanding not only is this symptom in the body caused by a conflict, but it's actually helping me to resolve that conflict and cope and deal with that conflict, okay? That's the quintessence. So I just broke down like the whole body of work in a very short way of understanding. And of course, it's a lot more detailed than that, but that sort of gives you a brief overview of how it all works and comes together.
Yeah, that was a highly impressive breakdown. Thank you. So yeah, that was an incredible breakdown of these 5 biological laws, and honestly, it makes a lot of sense to me because I've got a bit of a background in regards to that way of having that type of perspective when it comes to the human body, healing, immunity, those types of things, and disease. So say, for example, I have not heard of any of this before, and I listened to this podcast, and this all sounds very, very interesting. It resonates with me because I might have a friend or a family member or myself who's got cancer or some sort of disease. Mm-hmm. Where do I go from there? Like, can I just research this stuff and go through a protocol, or do I have to find a practitioner that can guide me? Like, what does that look like?
Right. So first off, with this understanding, it's about the knowing that every sort of cancer, every sort of biological program is the solution to the conflict being experienced. So most of the time when we have a cancer, the body will always break it down on its own. In fact, most of us might have already had cancers and big symptoms that would be scary without even knowing it. So that's where we get to the law of microbes, where all that fungi, bacteria, a good microbiome is going to be there to break down the cancer itself. Because most of the time, depending on what organ we're talking about, it is already in the resolution of the conflict that the biological adaptation or program has come. So most of the cancers will go away on their own, but it's about having the conscious awareness of understanding that. So let's say you're working with something, in Dr. Humer's work, he would get to the root of the conflict, the psychic root of what you experienced that created this biological adaptation. And majority of the time, that was already enough to just have the awareness of, oh yeah, nothing is wrong with me. I just experienced that. That makes sense. And then the body would do the work to allow it to be broken down on its own. Sometimes with the ontogenetic system, our third law, it is that the program is being created already in the conflict activity. And that's when you want to do the work to resolve that conflict or transcend that conflict through your own consciousness so you can overcome that. But really, what we like to say is why it's so important for you to know this and to study this is that so it's preventative, right? It's the same reason why you take True Hope. So you can prevent yourself from experiencing anything significant or major in your body. So this work is the same way. You want to know this before you go through a major conflict that makes you sick, right?
Because it's inevitable that things are going to happen to you, right? But do you have the tools available to you and the knowledge available to you where you're able to recognize what's actually happened, how my body's reacting to that situation, and then you're able to actually like process it yourself and give your body the ability to do what it does.
Yes, and it was Dr. Humer's mission to just get this work out there to the people. Like oftentimes we live in a society where you go to the doctor, you don't even understand what the doctor's saying. You know, they're going to diagnose you with something. They're in their white coat. I'm not saying anything against doctors. I'm just saying how we operate in society.
It's an odd dynamic, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like somebody else has all this information and knowledge and we don't have it, so we better just listen to them, right? This is different. This is, no, you have the right to this knowledge because it's how your biology works and it's how nature works, and nobody can tell you what conflict you've experienced. Only you know the answer to that as an individual, and you have to do the work to become okay with that. So it's quite radical responsibility you're taking here when you're practicing this.
It's viciously empowering to be able to have that perspective with some sort of when something's going on for you, right? You just described the whole like white coat syndrome thing perfectly there. Like it's not a therapeutic alliance. It's not a team thing, you know. It's like you're being kind of told what to do, and I don't want to bash doctors either, but that's just the way that they're trained. That's just the scenario in this like 7-minute period of time where you might get to explain. You can't explain your whole health history in that period of time to get a real diagnosis, right? But
right. And in our work, we even have the diagnostic shock, which is that you go to the doctor and now you have cancer and bam, now you've got your next conflict. I have cancer. Next biological adaptation created.
And they build on top of each other then.
Exactly. So it's like a never ending cycle where there's no way out. Whereas with this work, it's I already know this, so I'm not afraid. And anything that happens, I got this. And my body's got this, you know? So I'm not looking for any external sources, but having a community of people who know this work and who live in accordance with this work is super helpful. And even the mission of GHK was that hopefully one day you'd have one person in your family who knows this very, very well, who you could go to. And I happen to be pretty blessed to have a mother who knows this really, really well, who taught me. And I try and teach as many people as I know.
Yeah, well, I think that's very, very traditional. You'd have a medicine man or a medicine woman in tribal cultures in our small communities, and that would be exactly where that information will go. That generation would learn even more information, pass that down, etc., etc.
Yeah, in South America, in the shamanic tribes, they actually had something called the disentanglement process. So when somebody within the community would go to the shaman or the healer and say, I have something, the shaman would say, let's go through the disentanglement process where I disentangle myself from anything that's causing me distress. And I ask the Mother Earth to be disentangled from that or that person or that situation. And when you know this, I was like, yeah, of course, that's exactly what we're doing. I mean, we've been known this for centuries.
Do you get a lot of resistance when you bring this stuff up to people?
Yeah, sometimes.
Tell me about that, because
sure.
it's I think that if you didn't understand this, or you had a very strict belief system around healing, disease, medicine, doctors, whatever, like you would have a very difficult time wrapping your head around this, right? So like, can you give me some like examples? Or
so it's controversial work because on one hand, let's say you have the person who just is really believing in the medical system and ascribes only to that ideology that, you know, we kind of collectively as society have to ascribe to. So that person, this is like, oh, that's nonsense. That can't be true because, you know, the books say this, and they're thinking about it very logistically. And on the other side, you have maybe some really spiritual conscious people that say, oh no, but it's a miraculous healing, or, you know, I pray and it does that. And that's true too. So it's like you have these two sides of the coin where they could look at this work and go, absolutely not, you know, it's this or it's that. So I really like to approach it on an individualized basis where I say, well, actually, through research and even through the mainstream research now, there is a collective acknowledgement that, you know, the trauma that we experience gets stored in the body. So that's great now that there's some knowingness of that. And with this whole shift in more mental health awareness, people are knowing to take more better care of their mental health. So from the perspective of psychology, they might resonate with this too. So yes, it's very controversial and sometimes I do receive a lot of backlash, but what I try and do is work more intuitively. It's almost like I might be able to get this to you without you really knowing it. And then by the time I've finished talking to you, you've kind of already admitted what your conflict was. And I'm saying, well, yeah, don't you think that that has something to do with what you're experiencing? And most of the time they don't deny that, right?
Yeah, doing this podcast and interviewing so many practitioners, doctors, etc., who have switched more into, let's say, like a holistic, natural path of healing. They've had their experience of conventional medicine for a long, long period of time, recognize that it's not the only answer or the answer, and they've tried different things, or they've had experiences that have led them down a different path. But you're a young person. So I wonder, like, how does this resonate with your like group of friends that you're close with? Like, do you talk to them about this? Do they connect with it? Like,
good question. Yeah. So I am really passionate about this work. And one of the reasons why I'm passionate about educating young people specifically is that, like, for example, this work was underground for decades, but also there was no infrastructure like the internet or social media to be able to amplify the knowledge. So what's really amazing about this young people is that we do have the ability to amplify this knowledge and tell people about it. And if we can start to live in accordance with it from a young age already, we're so much better set up forever, especially if we want to start a family unit. We can just carry this work on. So I happen to be quite outspoken, you know, otherwise I probably wouldn't be here. So I make sure to tell all of my friends, and I say, you know, come study, come to group, come to the class, learn this work. And it usually starts with, you know, a friend casually mentioning, oh, you know, like I really have this like cold sore on my lip and I don't really know where it came from. And I'm like, oh, really? Like, who did you really want to kiss? You know, because it's a separation conflict of being separated from something that you wanted or something that you didn't want. So usually it'll start with something as simple as I might just give them a clue as to something they're experiencing. And that might draw their curiosity to be like, what are you talking about? And before you know it, they're sitting in class and I'm making sure they know it even better. So I like to say, when you know this work and when you practice this work, you walk your walk and you talk your talk. And I really strive to do that. So I live in accordance with this work. I talk about this work to as many people as I can, and it allows for it to grow. So yes, I think young people are heavily influenced by the narrative that's out there right now. But just as much as there is that, there is a strong group of young people who just have this intuitive feeling that something is not right. And they want answers and they want a community. And so I really strive to be able to create that in any way I possibly can.
Can you give me an example of how you live this work?
Right. So it's really a lifestyle shift. So I really have a great conscious awareness of what's going through my body. So I'm teaching an amazing course with my mother right now on women's health. And I thought that was really important because when you look at the female, every month she's going through her menstruation or she's getting pregnant and she's carrying life, right? So even in class, I like to say, how many of you women, every time your period comes, you go like, oh my God, my period, I hate this. I hate this. You're creating the conflict for yourself instead of accepting and living in biology and nature and saying to your body, thank you so much for allowing me this process that I can give life. Or what do so many women do? They go on birth control and they just deny their body from experiencing it at all, right? So when you look at just through being a woman in this world today and how I live in accordance with this work is so significant because I strive to have a relationship with my body where when my cycle comes every month, I welcome it and I welcome the symptoms that I'm experiencing with it, which are minor because I don't have a lot of conflicts with my cycle because I embrace it. But most women think, oh my God, no, I can't go to work. I can't do this. I feel awful. I feel awful. And they create this track that follows them. So that's just one example of how I live this work as a female, right? Even when you look at pregnancy, when you're in mainstream society, once you get pregnant, the doctors just treat you like you're sick and you got a doctor appointment every month and you got to go here and you got to do that checkup. And it's like, oh my God, something's going on with you in your body when really there's the most sacred, important time. So it's about having a sacred union with your body. And, anytime I catch myself talking to someone who starts to get into fear over, oh, I'm having this ache and I really don't like it, I say, welcome it. That's amazing. That's a message from your body telling you something. Listen to that. So when you're walking this walk, when you're talking this talk, you're living in accordance with your own biology. You're welcoming every experience that comes to you. And then I even encourage you to, when you see somebody going through something, you're there to support them and you're there to offer something from your perspective that you can share. Maybe they won't receive it. That's okay. Maybe they're not ready to do that, and that's fine too. But just you offering that point of reference that's new for them, that can be enough to just spark curiosity to look at something a different way. So it's like, I just truly believe we all have these different ways of inciting some kind of intuitive information to each other, like we're all just guiding each other home. So the more we can live our life like that, the better, really.
Yeah, it sounds like consciousness and awareness is a very big part of all of this, I suppose, and the way that you're talking about walking this walk. It's you're aware of like what's going on in your body. You're aware of like the thoughts you have, the feelings you have, the behaviors you're going to exhibit, the things that are going on around you. And I think that once you're able to start becoming a little bit more aware, you start being able to actually quieten the noise and actually start being able to listen to your body and listen to the thoughts that you might be having and kind of connecting the mind and the body a little bit more. Mm-hmm. I'd say it's a very big step for a lot of people to start taking to reassess so many different things in their lives, whether that is a crappy job, a crappy relationship with their own body, whatever that might be. Do you have any like practical tips for people to start becoming a little bit more aware? Because you mentioned you had this conscious brand at the beginning, and I was going to ask you like, what's your definition of consciousness? Because we hear this word like a lot. So maybe you can answer that question first, and then maybe give us a few examples of like how people anywhere can really start to become a little bit more aware of like what's going on inside and around them.
Mm-hmm. So for me, consciousness is the alignment with the entirety of the oneness. That's what consciousness is for me. Understanding that I am beyond just this physical body and I'm beyond just this experience, that there is a part of me that is all knowing, that is divine. And so when I have the gnosis of that, I know that everything that I experience has to also follow that law and be significant and purposeful and be interconnected, right? That's the one, that's the interconnectedness, that's the whole, that's the consciousness. And now when we're looking at that from a practical standpoint with this work, that would already be downgrading our conflict. So that consciousness allows us to experience a conflict and not be so traumatized, not have it be so severe. But of course, life's going to throw things at us. But the more we have this consciousness, the more that starts to downgrade. And in this work, we look at two things. We call one a practical solution and one a transcendent solution, right? So let's say my dog's going through a separation. So separation is like a hair loss, right? Could even be on your dog. You always pet your dog on your tummy, and maybe now you've gone away for vacation. If you notice, they've lost all this hair on their tummy. So a practical solution would be to go comfort them and rub their tummy again, right? That's practical, right? Or maybe, I'm having an indigestible morsel, something I can't just stomach. I had somebody once who had some really severe stomach issues, and I told them, I think you maybe want to leave your relationship, because there was so much in her relationship with her partner that she could not stomach. And when she finally did that practical solution and left that relationship, stomach symptoms gone, right? Because she was having all these conflicts from being with her partner. So that's what we call a practical solution. And now let's say you need a transcendent solution, right? You have somebody's died. That's a huge conflict. And you have a biological adaptation with that conflict. Now you need to do the work to have the consciousness to transcend that. And that's what we call in this work our transcendent solutions, right? That's when we really need to do the healing, the journey with the body, to do whatever we can to get to a point where we can come to terms with that. And that can be more difficult for somebody who's not used to looking at life that way.
Okay, Natasha, thank you so much. That was an incredible... I don't even think that was a foundational introduction to German new medicine. That was just connected with me in many, many different ways in regards to like what I've experienced just in my own body and people around me, and then just like being able to dive into different, I don't want to say alternative methods, but the real complementary medicine, So
right.
How can people maybe connect with you if they've got questions, if you're open to that? Are there some like good resources where people are able to like learn a little bit more? We've mentioned a couple of them already.
Yes, absolutely. So I have everything in my programs, events, courses, all under my company and brand Wondheirland. And that's Wondheirland. So we are all the heirs to this work and to this world. So I like to put in that word. So you can go to wondheirland.com or look up Wondheirland on social media. And you can also look at great resources like the ones I mentioned in this conversation, learninggnm.com, GHK Academy, and there's amazing other advocates like Dr. Melissa Sell, who I work with, and Gilbert Renaud, who are doing really, really amazing jobs at getting this work out there on their platforms as well. And I just want to stress that this is a team effort, and so I owe a lot to my mother, almost everything to my mother, though, I wouldn't be here today. But she is the one who is truly at the forefront of getting people connected with this work, promoting people who are leaders and pioneers in this work and in this knowledge. So I really just have to give all my gratitude and thanks to her for allowing me to share this with you today.
Big shout out to Mum, okay? She's in the room.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Natasha. I really appreciate your time today. Thanks.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, that is it for this episode of True Hope Cast, the official podcast for True Hope Canada. I will make sure that there are lots of links available for you in the show notes so you can connect with all this phenomenal information. For a lot of people, it's going to be brand new, but very, very exciting. But we'll see you next week.